coming out for this very, very important discussion. As I'm sure most of you are aware, the unelected School Reform Commission voted to close 27 Philadelphia public schools 2 weeks ago. This comes at a time when Pennsylvania currently has a prison population of 51,000 and a $2 billion corrections budget. $600 million has been set aside for the construction of new prisons. Nationally, our incarceration rate far surpasses that of any other country. We also have the world's largest military budget at $1 trillion a year and hundreds of military bases all over the world. All of these things, in addition to cuts in social spending programs, play an enormous part in the destruction of our communities with little hope for change. 1 in 3 Americans are living in poverty with little to look forward to other than low-paying jobs, while the few social amenities that we have, like education, Medicare, and public transit, are drastically underfunded. Why are the people that control our country cutting back on social services while handing millions over to the military and to the banks? Why do the rich get richer year after year while working people face austerity? Why is the priority given to prison construction instead of improving our schools and communities? Why is, and perhaps most importantly, why is virtually all of the political discourse in this country monopolized by 2 corporate-funded, pro-austerity political parties? And to help us deal with some of these questions and discuss them a bit further, I would first like to introduce Dr. Anthony Monteiro, who is a distinguished lecturer of African American Studies and Associate Director of the Institute for the Study of Race and Thought at Temple University. Dr. Monteiro is a native of Philadelphia, African American scholar, and a long-time and continuing fighter for justice, whether it's defending Mumia Jamal or defending African American studies on campus. So I'll hand it over to Dr. Monteiro.
Thank you very much for inviting me here this evening. As a native Philadelphian, I want to welcome anybody that's from out of town to our city. We could not be in a better place to discuss the issues that affect working class and poor communities. Philadelphia is a city of poverty. It is the poorest city of the top 10 cities in the United States. It is one of the most racially segregated cities in the United States. But it is also a city of a certain amount of wealth, not on the level of New York City or Chicago, which are financial centers, but nonetheless, it is a city of considerable wealth, but a city where the wealth is geographically concentrated, is racially and class concentrated among not the 1%, but in the city of Philadelphia, we're talking about this wealth being concentrated at the level of the top 1/10 of 1%. So, the social geographer David Harvey talks about such things as the geography of wealth and the geography of poverty. And so in this city, if you know anything about it, and you walk around it, you can see how wealth is geographically concentrated pretty much in the area that we're now in, and in the major universities in the city, which are not really institutions of learning as much as they are corporations real estate speculators, and developers. I teach at Temple University, which is ruthlessly gentrifying the part of the city that has pretty much been the center of black residency, black working class communities for over 70 years. And I know this part of the city because this is where I've always lived. It is where my parents lived. It is where my grandparents came to when they came from the South in one of the great migrations to the north. And now if you go to this area, we see Temple University engaged in one of the most cold-blooded gentrification processes that one can imagine. I've never seen anything like it. This is defended and protected by the Temple University police force, which is larger than the Philadelphia police force. And the whole point is to protect the property and the white students, as it were, and I put quotes around this, from the black community. And certainly, second only to the profound hatred and dislike that Philadelphians legitimately feel for the Philadelphia police force, I have never witnessed the dislike and contempt for Philadelphia institution that black Philadelphia feels for Temple University. I mean, it is really a study in what the contemporary class-race conflict will look like. And I want to suggest near the end of what I'm talking about how these dynamics come together. Now, Temple University is outdoing the University of Pennsylvania in this gentrification and ethnic cleansing of this historic center of black community life. We had always thought of University of Pennsylvania, this so-called Ivy League elite university, as the worst of the worst, the scum of society, the representatives of the most racist and ruthless elements, hiding behind the walls of Ivy League. We had thought that. We didn't think it could get any worse. But Temple has already outdid them. And if I had the opportunity to take you on a walking and driving tour, we're talking about miles, square miles and miles of a community that is being taken over and people being pushed out. And one of the questions you always hear, well, where have the black people gone to live? Where will they live? And will they be close to public transportation? And will they be able to get to jobs? And what schools will they attend? Etc. Questions such as these. Well, this issue of Temple's gentrification is also now being manifested in the attempt to destroy African American studies at Temple. Now, they're not going to just, and they're not so stupid as to just eliminate the department. Their point is to eviscerate it, to And so, you know, a lot of people are kind of not clear sometimes about the fight for African American studies. A lot of people say, well, that's a bourgeois struggle. That's a struggle unconnected from the lives of the poor and working class of the city of Philadelphia. And it could be that if African American studies became a disengaged center of, since I'm on tape, I will not curse, I'll just put quotes, scholarly academic research. But African American studies, going back to the 1970s in our department, has never been that. It has always attempted, literally in one or another way, not always perfectly, not always all of us agreeing, to be an arm of the black community's struggle for freedom and dignity. We've never been anything else. To eviscerate African American studies at Temple would be to sever our ties to the community from which we come, and hence to deny our students and our professors that life-giving blood and oxygen that is the African American working class. There are administrators that, when asked about the relationship of African American studies at Temple to the African American community, replied, "I don't see a black community." When I heard that, I said, well, maybe this is a teaching moment. And I said, well, I'll pull out my weapon of I'm going to say, not a mass destruction, but a mass uplifter or education. W.E.B. Du Bois's The Philadelphia Negro, in case you hadn't heard. And I said, well, maybe I'll take you on a walking tour to Mother Bethel AME Church, founded by Richard Allen. Or maybe I should take you to Mother Zor, United Methodist Church, or to St. Thomas African Episcopal Church. Or maybe I should take you to where the first black Masonic Lodge, named after Octavius V. Cato, who was killed by a white mob in the late 19th century because he was leading black people to the polls. Or maybe I should tell you about the other institutions of black life here in Philadelphia, Freedom Theater. You know, now if you don't see that, you are ideologically committed to making African Americans invisible, and thus are committed to the counter-revolutionary idea that we live in a post-racist society. Now, I just want to kind of end on this. The ideological struggle in the time of Obama. And I know my friend Glen has a lot to say about that.
Obama now.
He's going to tell me about that. So maybe I should take some people away. But when we talk about the ideological struggle at the time of Obama, there's been no one more committed and more consistent in that fight than Glen Ford and his colleagues at Black Agenda Report. Amen. So, he has educated the world and has taken a lot of heat for it, but I want to talk a little bit about that. You see, Obama represents the consolidation of the most counter-revolutionary forces in the 20th century and now the early 21st century of America, rather than a liberal reformist or even a centrist. These are delusional concepts.
Right on the money.
Obama represents the forces of counter-revolution. And it is so interesting that the front edge of counter-revolutionary ideology takes on what appears to be a very not so vicious form. All they say is that we are in a post-racial America. That doesn't sound like what we usually associate with counter-revolution. Unless we take seriously what the great W.E.B. Du Bois said at the beginning of the 20th century, and I want to interpret it and then end on it. He said the problem of the 20th century will be the problem of the color line. Everybody quotes it. I think very few people really understand what he was saying. In 1903, he was saying the problem of democracy, of bourgeois democracy, would be race. Well, he writes it in 1903. What are we? That's about 38 years out of the end of the Civil War and chattel slavery, and about 20-some years out from the defeat of Reconstruction. The first attempt at democracy for the 4 million enslaved Africans. So he says liberal democracy will remain in a crisis unless the problem of race is solved. Okay? Now he would evolve and develop that concept over time. He gets to, in 1935, his magnum opus, Black Reconstruction in America, which is more a theory of American history than a study of events. He makes certain unbelievable observations in that work. One of the great observations is that he shows in chapter 2, entitled The White Worker, does a brief history of the labor movement of the 19th century. He says that the strategic weakness is its failure to take up the struggle against slavery, the race question. Okay? And he concludes that unless the labor movement and the left take as a strategic question that of race, labor nor democracy can move forward. But then he makes certain other observations. He says what we call slaves are really a proletariat. He says that after the Civil War and the end of chattel slavery, there was the possibility in several states, including states where there were black majorities, South Carolina, Louisiana, Mississippi, a decisive plurality, let us say in Georgia, Alabama, you see what I'm saying? And he thought out this question of race and democracy and said that in several states it was possible, this is 1935, for the establishment of the dictatorship of the black proletariat as a democratic mechanism for the fulfillment of democracy and the 14th and 15th amendments to the Constitution. Now clearly he understood that such a dictatorship would not only remain at the democratic or bourgeois democratic level, but would certainly go over to a new social system. But then he says a counter-revolution of property occurred, and that's the way he calls it. I think it's chapter 14, entitled The Counter-Revolution of Property. And he argues that that counter-revolution was based upon breaking the back of the black proletariat and doing what Theodore Allen says in his famous 2-volume work, now re-edited and published by Jeffrey Perry, the reinvention of the white race as a psychological category to prevent, I should say psychological and ideological category, to prevent the development of a class across the color line. And then he tells us, the slave-owning class, which was tiny in comparison to the population of the South, was socially, politically, and economically ruined by the Civil War. Where did the new ruling class of the South come from? And here's an extraordinary observation. I've not heard anyone else talk about this. It emerged from the poor whites. And he uses this word, he always has these kind of words. If you're Catholic, you might recognize the word transubstantiation. The transubstantiation of a part of the poor white population to become now the ruling class of the South, and who would then impose upon the entire South a reign of racial terror and counter-revolution previously unseen in American history. End here. The Obama presidency, contrary to popular perception, is nothing more nor less than the consolidation of counter-revolutionary power in the United States as part of an attempt to globally reposition itself for war and the recolonization of Africa in the first instance and parts of Asia. We need not go into long discussion, just facts and events.
That's right.
Libya.
That's right.
2010, 2011, and the brutal assassination of Muammar Gaddafi. Of course, it is not coincidental that the Gaddafi government was proposing what the Chavez government is still proposing in South America, a Bank of Africa,
Right.
based upon an African currency comparable to the euro, but stronger than the euro because it would be based on gold, based upon what he called the gold dinar. A strategic attack upon the neoliberal Washington consensus. Something that none of the BRIC countries. Oh, fine. Oh, good. What time did I deserve? Okay. The Chinese, the Indians, the Brazilians, no one of the major so-called emerging markets have even dared to challenge the neoliberal economic order at the level of challenging the dollar as the global reserve currency, which guarantees that no matter how bad things get and how messed up and how badly they manage the U.S. economy, there's always this fallback to the dollar that all nations have to hold on to as a reserve currency if they're going to be a part of the global trading mechanism. Libya, the Congo, situation in the Congo, the Eastern Congo, 5.5 million people killed, many more millions wounded, rape as a weapon of war. People have it all wrong. This is not because Africans wage war on each other ethnically that way. It is aggression sponsored, especially in the first instance, by American imperialism, using the Rwandan government of Paul Kagame. And this goes back to, and I've put quotes here, the so-called genocide of 1994. A genocide that never happened, unless you believe that Africans handled knives in a way and with an efficiency that's never been known to history. 10,000 Rwandans, we are told, killed 800,000 people with machetes in 100 days. It didn't happen.
That's right.
It was a civil war promoted by the United States to bring Paul Kagame and his regime to power in order to wage war in the eastern Congo for the resources there.
That's right.
We are in a new stage of this counter-revolution. I think we have to think about what are the forms of struggle to defend the people, to prevent all-out world war, and to dismantle these institutions of domestic repression and control. Thank you very much.